Vintage motorcycles do not make great first bikes. I've had plenty of people reach out to me who are in the beginning process of their motorcycle journey, and those people have been inspired by the channel or perhaps other videos they've seen online of people getting and riding on vintage motorcycles. I've talked in last videos about the daily driving aspect of them and that they can be daily driven, but for someone who's looking to get into motorcycles and looking to get into vintage bikes in particular, here's things that I recommend and the reason why I say they don't make great first bikes. But there's a huge reason why I do not recommend you get onto a vintage bike, and that is a couple of things. Very first thing is they're not as safe as newer motorcycles will be. A lot of vintage motorcycles will have tires that are expired or perhaps just worn down and you need to replace those. A new rider might not particularly know or pay attention to those things. The brakes might not be adequate, and for a new rider with these higher speeds, they might not be able to brake fast enough, and you might still have drum brakes in some models. These older motorcycles also tend to weigh more, and the ergonomics might not be as comfortable as some of the newer machines. When you think about big motorcycles, nowadays a 750 doesn't really necessarily seem big, but back in the day, the CB750, the Z1, which was a 900, were huge bikes. So even though the engines aren't the biggest thing in the world, back then the motorcycles were the top of the line, and that means that the motorcycles are going to be a little bit larger. But to talk about the real reason why, all of those things aside, even if you can live with all of that, the biggest thing, bar none, is the fact that a vintage motorcycle will not allow you to properly ride enough for a first-time rider who's trying to rack up miles. Now, I have said you can ride these bikes, you can put tons of miles on them, they're going to be pretty reliable for you, but the problem is small things are going to break. Unless you're super mechanically inclined and ready to jump onto the bike, you might not want to get a vintage motorcycle. Not only that, riding season is very precious here. We only have a couple of months, couple of really great weeks if you really want to boil it down here in Wisconsin. If your motorcycle goes down during prime time, which is pretty likely on a vintage bike, and you don't have the facilities or you can't get the parts fast enough to work on them, you won't be able to ride during prime time. The first year I bought my CB750, I rode it all year long with minor issues. I lived with those minor issues, but it did restrict me from taking the motorcycle super far. A lot of vintage bikes will have these smaller issues pop up, and you can still ride them, but you can't do super long distances without fixing the problem. Vintage bike is a great secondary option, but if you're looking for your first and primary option, as a first-time rider, I recommend you steer away from it. Properly prepped vintage bikes will be super reliable for you, but I just think if you're a new rider that hopping onto one of these bikes just isn't quite right. There are plenty of great options that have this old styling, but they have modern day engines in them, they have modern day equipment in them, and they have modern day and updated rubbers, seals, gaskets, and those kind of things. Those bikes might not necessarily be super fast and wicked and all of this. They might ride very similar to the older bikes, not quite the same because some of them will have fuel injection, even the ones with carburetors, just in my opinion don't ride the same. They lack a little bit of the character, the true character that these old bikes had. But you can get really close, you can get the looks, and you can pack on miles and perhaps buy a secondary bike. Now, please do not buy a project bike as your first motorcycle. The whole point of a first motorcycle is to get yourself out and riding. Now, I understand winter projects, I understand if you're not a rider and you just want to have a fun tinker toy, that's completely fine. This is for people who are truly trying to ride, truly trying to get their motorcycles and trying to put big miles on, or even small miles on, just putting miles on in general. It's literally going to do the opposite. Your project is always going to have some type of issues, you're always going to be tinkering through something. That's the life with vintage motorcycles. Even though, you might have the bike ready to ride, there's always going to be something small that you can adjust or change or this or that, and it's an ongoing cycle that, well, you just kind of got to live with. If you missed my last video, all my motorcycles have very small issues, and yeah, it just happened that all of them failed at a very good time, and that time was high season during, well, the riding season. But I still have a newer bike, which I'm fortunate to own, that I can just get on and ride and not have to think about those things. If I didn't have the newer bike and I had a collection or a fleet of 5 vintage bikes, the likelihood of all 5 of them breaking if properly maintained and upkept is very small. But something can go wrong, and you can have 5 bikes that do end up not working. If you don't find the time for one, you ride the second one, the third one might have something go wrong in the fueling system, and then, the other 2 might have a puncture in the tire, whatever it is. Even with 5 bikes, it's a very high likelihood that something will fail with these vintage motorcycles. You might be able to ride 2 of them, 3 of them might be completely out, but you can't take 2 of them far. When you have a newer motorcycle, and I'm fortunate to have my newer motorcycle that I can just get on and I can just ride and not have to think about it. Sometimes that is great. I love the vintage bikes, but they are not end all be all. That being said, you can do big miles on vintage bikes. I'm not trying to downgrade them at all. I'm just trying to prevent people from having bad experiences with these motorcycles, because I see it all the time. People buying these motorcycles as their first bikes, or buying project bikes, trying and thinking that one day they're going to ride it, and then they end up hating vintage bikes, and they come and tell me these stories of, wow, I used to have one and it gave me non-stop problems. There's a really good quote of, you can't not have fun while riding a motorcycle. It doesn't matter what motorcycle you're on. You can enjoy the riding experience. Some bikes might not ride as good as others, and when we compare them, we talk about compared to other motorcycles, but at the end of the day, even the worst motorcycle, you can still have fun doing it as long as the motorcycle is going to properly be functioning. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this topic. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I think it's a very valid point. As always, leave a like to the channel, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.